So you're thinking of setting up an all-male guppy tank but you don't know where to start, or maybe you're worried about aggression levels in the aquarium. Well, that's good because this is my all-male guppy tank, and for this video I'm going to go over how you can set a similar tank up from scratch where your guppies will thrive. So first things first, and you're going to need an aquarium, and this might sound basic but I often see people on social media recommend a minimum tank size of 5 US gallons or 19 litres for guppies, and this can work for breeding tank setups, but I would recommend larger tanks for all male setups. In my experience, you'll get far less aggression with the more male guppies you have in your tank, with the sweet spot usually being 8 or more guppies. Due to this, you'll probably want to be looking at a minimum tank size of 10 US gallons or 38 litres if possible, but larger tanks are always better. Ideally, you'll also want this to be a rectangle shape too, similar to my guppy tank, rather than a cube similar to my betta fish tanks. This is because guppies spend a lot of their time swimming in the upper third of the tank's water column, so the overall footprint is important to let your guppies spread out and swim around without getting too close to each other. Next up, if you're choosing to keep a planted tank that I highly recommend, similar to mine, you're going to need some type of substrate. In hindsight, I actually made a mistake here with my own tank because I went with Fluval Stratum that buffers your tank's water and lowers your pH, with this being less than ideal for hard water fish like guppies. During the initial setup of the tank, I didn't think this would be much of an issue because the Fluval Stratum in my other tanks has always worked well, and my water out of my tap is actually quite soft and has a lower pH than what Fluval Stratum usually buffers to. If I could rewind time, I would probably switch this out for a dirted tank setup where I'd use 1 inch of topsoil as the nutrient layer on the base of the aquarium, and then cap it with around 1 inch of fine gravel or sand to prevent this nutrients from leaking into the tank's water column. This is a very cheap and pretty easy substrate option that a lot of people use in the hobby, and it is pretty beginner friendly to set up as well. Other options that are usable right out of the bag include CaribSea's Eco Complete or Seachem Flourite, as both of these are inert substrates that won't affect your tank's pH level. Next up, you're going to need some hiding spots and sight breaks for your guppies, and there's a bunch of different options on the market these days. As you can see, in my tank I use rocks, driftwood and an absolute ton of live plants, but you could use things like fake plants, aquarium decorations, PVC pipes or even coconut shells if needed. Adding this kind of thing to your all-male guppy tank lets your guppies stay away from each other and break line of sight so they're not always staring at each other, and get a little break from their tank mates when needed. As you can probably tell, live plants are my personal favourite option, and I would highly recommend them because they add a ton of hiding spots, a ton of sight breaks, and they also help to maintain safe and stable water parameters for your aquarium. I know that some people new to the hobby don't like the idea of keeping live plants as they think they will be difficult to keep, but I have videos going over the best aquarium plants for beginners and the best floating plants in the hobby that I link in the card and description, with all of the plants featured in those videos being very beginner friendly and easy to keep. Although it wasn't added intentionally to the tank, my guppies did end up finding this small little cave area in the scape, and I have noticed them relaxing in here from time to time. In all honesty, I doubt you'll need as many hiding spots and sight breaks as my tank, but I am sure that your guppies will appreciate you adding some to the aquarium. Next up is your tank accessories, and there's a bunch of different options out there these days, so you will definitely be able to customize these to meet your needs. Starting with filtration, and for a smaller tank that's around 10 US gallons, I would recommend a cheap air-powered sponge filter or a cheap air-powered box filter, as these should be more than enough to maintain the cycle in your guppy tank, especially if you use fast-grown stem plants and floating plants. Moving on to a medium-sized tank, and larger sponge filters can still work here, but personally I would be leaning more towards either a spillway hang-on back filter or a canister hang-on back filter. Both of these let you customize the filter media that's inside of your filter and add far more than a lot of sponge filters to maintain your water parameters for your guppies. Although most people won't be going with a very large tank setup, there's also canister filters that are available for very large tanks, but in reality the majority of people watching this video won't be needing these. The job of your filter is to provide aerated surface area for beneficial colonies of bacteria and archaea to form that will help maintain your ammonia and nitrite levels in your tank so they don't harm your guppies. Even small amounts of ammonia and nitrite in your tank can cause long-term damage that might be fatal to your guppies, while also irritating the fish and increasing chances of aggression. You could try natural filtration too with something like the Wallstad method that uses fast-grown stem plants and a lot of floating plants to maintain maintain filtration, and this can work well, and I use it in one of my better fish tanks. But if you are new to keeping a planted tank, I would recommend the use of a traditional filter and use the fast grown plants as a supplementary filtration option. Moving on, and we have the aquarium heater, and I do know some people who maintain thriving guppy colonies without an internal heater, but they usually use their home's central heating system to manage the water temperature in their aquariums. Personally, I keep a dedicated heater in each of my tanks, and I opt for the Fluval T series of heaters because they have an excellent reputation in the hobby and they've never caused any problems for me. I know that the Fluval T series are slightly more expensive than some of the other options on the market, but this is one area where I would recommend you avoid trying to cut costs. I will have a dedicated section for water temperature later in the video because there's a few things that I want to cover, so we'll move on to your tank's lighting for now. Now, depending on your budget and if you're going to be keeping live plants in your aquarium, there's a bunch of different lights out there on the market these days. My all-male guppy tank runs on a Nitrate C10 lighting unit that is pretty budget friendly and has a low lumen output, but as you can see, all of the plants in this tank are doing well, and I will leave a full plant list in the video's description. I honestly do think that the Nitrate C10 will be enough for most low light plants in the hobby, and you should easily be able to get some beginner plants thriving in your aquarium with this light. If you do want to keep medium light requirement plants, and you might want to look towards the Hygge 957 that I also use on some of my other tanks, and it is a great light, and I actually have a Nitrate C10 versus Hygge 957 comparison video that I link in the card and description that compares the two. If you are only keeping low light requirement plants, then the Nitrate C10 will easily be enough, and it's cheaper than the Hygge 957. So now that we have our aquarium, some substrate, some hiding spots, and all the required accessories, we need to cycle the tank. There's a couple of different methods you can use to cycle your tank, but I recently tried out the fishless and plantless cycle method, and I honestly think it's the best one that I've tried so far. This method does mean that you would technically add any live plants that you're using for hiding spots after the tank has completed its cycle, so keep that in mind. With this method, you won't be buying your guppies until your tank has completed the cycle, because the ammonia and nitrite levels spike to extremely harmful levels as your beneficial colonies grow to maintain stable water parameters. Although some plants will be fine in this tank during the cycling process, some of them can have issues. The main reason I like the idea of keeping plants out of the tank during this cycling method is that the beneficial colonies all feed on the ammonia and nitrite in the tank rather than your plants using some of it up. You will need a product like Dr. Tim's ammonia solution, and you can follow the instructions on the bottle to simulate a bioload from your guppies so beneficial bacteria and archaea colonies can grow in your aquarium. Depending on the cycling method you choose to use in your tank, it may take as long as 8 weeks for things to stabilise, but with the fishless and plantless cycle it usually takes between 3 and 4 weeks, so in the grand scheme of things it's really not that long to wait to make sure your fish are safe. Different people have their own methods of working out when their tank is cycled and safe for their fish, but personally I use the exact same method recommended on the Dr. Tim's ammonia solution product, and that is when you use Dr. Tim's to dose your tank to 2 ppm of ammonia, and within 24 hours your test kit reads 0 ppm ammonia and 0 ppm nitrate. Bacteria in a bottle products like Fritzyme 7 may be able to help cycle your tank a lot faster, but there are some downsides of these. In my opinion, these products are quite expensive, and most of them only contain live cultures of Nitrosomus and Nitrobacter bacterias. The effective pH ranges of these two types of bacteria are 7.0 to 8.0 and 7.5 to 8.0, and their effectiveness can drop off outside of these pH ranges. Thankfully, this is going to be an all-male guppy tank setup, so this is bang in the middle of our target pH range anyway, so these products may be helpful for your tank setup. Another potential problem is that research from the University of Waterloo suggests that archaea actually does a lot more of the heavy lifting than beneficial bacteria in many aquariums. The research doesn't specify pH levels though, but personally I usually just let my tank naturally cycle without any beneficial bacteria in a bottle, because it is extra costs and it is questionable on the actual benefit they offer. Once your tank is cycled, we need to maintain safe and stable water parameters for your guppies. First up is ammonia, nitrite and nitrate, with the first two being far more toxic than the last one. Thankfully, the beneficial colonies of bacteria and archaea that you formed in your tank during the cycling process as well as any live planted tanks should be able to keep ammonia and nitrite at 0 ppm. In my experience, a liquid test kit is far more consistent in checking these levels than the cheap test strips that you can get, but even then the liquid test kits usually only detect levels that are above 0.25 ppm, and the issue with this is that levels below this can still be harmful for your fish, especially in hard water, because you're dealing with real ammonia rather than ammonium, so use these levels as a rough guide. Thankfully, using the cycling method that I recommended earlier in the video should easily have built up plenty of beneficial bacteria and archaea colonies in the tank to maintain safe ammonia and nitrite levels even without any live plants in the aquarium. That said, I would still recommend you do add live plants to the aquarium if possible, not just for hiding spots and sight breaks, but also to help manage your tank's nitrate levels. If needed though, you can manage nitrate with regular partial water changes in the tank and keep them within safe levels for your guppies. I usually check the water parameters in my own all-male guppy tank once per week, and I get 0 ppm ammonia, 0 ppm nitrite, and the nitrates are usually around 10 ppm, which is perfectly safe for guppies. Next up is managing the pH levels of your guppies, as guppies are hard water fish, but you'll often see people on social media commonly say that guppies will be totally fine in soft water, and in reality this is probably not true. The recommended pH range for guppies is 7.0 to 8.5 for several different reasons, but the easiest reason to use as an explanation is calcium. Calcium is deficient in soft water aquariums, but as this article from Practical Fish Keeping magazine suggests, a lot of hard water fish like guppies can struggle to absorb minerals in soft water tanks. Although it's not specific to guppies, research from the National Taiwan University found that in some species of fish, around 97% of their calcium intake is actually via their gills, with calcium being derived from the tank's water column rather than their food. Then we have this research from the Japanese Society of Fisheries that found zero correlation between the addition of dietary calcium in the diet of their guppies and the growth rate of their fish, suggesting that guppies may not be able to absorb dietary calcium as a lot of people think, and they do need to take it in via their gills from their tank's water column. As I mentioned earlier, calcium is deficient in soft water tanks, so this can cause health problems in your guppies, so always try and keep them in hard water tanks if possible. Don't worry if you have soft water out of your tap. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, I do as well, and there's a few ways you can increase the pH levels of your tank to suitable levels for your guppies. I have tried a few of them now, and in all honesty, I honestly think some cheap crushed coral is the best option, and you can either put it in the back of your tank or in your filter, and it will slowly and safely increase the pH levels of the water in your guppy tank to suitable levels. So moving on, we have water temperature, and the recommended water temperature range for guppies is between 63 and 82 degrees Fahrenheit or 17 and 28 degrees Celsius, but water temperature will affect your guppy's metabolic rate, and this is important. Although there's a ton of posts on social media and forums about this as well, research from the Indian College of Fisheries found that 86 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 degrees Celsius is the optimum temperature for length and weight gain of guppies. This water temperature can potentially help you raise your fry quicker, but it also increases the metabolic rate of your guppies. That same research found that they lost around 10% of all of the guppies at that water temperature during the test period, and on top of that they also found that guppies kept in even warmer water had higher fatality rates. That research also found that the guppies kept in low temperature test batches had zero fatalities due to their slow metabolic rates, but they did grow at a slower pace. So this does seem to pair up with the countless posts on social media saying that guppies kept between 68 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 to 25 degrees Celsius water grow at a slow pace, don't get as large, but will live far longer. Personally, I keep my all-male guppy tank at around 77 degrees Fahrenheit or 25 degrees Celsius to stay in the middle of the road of the recommendations. I have lowered my water temperature to 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius twice for around a week each time to test different stuff in the aquarium. One thing that I did notice during these test periods is that there was a lot less tail fanning and chasing between the male guppies in my tank during these test periods. Due to this, if you are having problems with excess aggression in your all-male guppy tank, consider trying to lower the water temperature slightly within the suitable range for guppies to see if that helps to lower the aggression levels. So now that we have suitable water parameters in our tank, it's time to add our guppies. Firstly, we need to know how to differentiate between male and female guppies, as I've seen a surprising number of posts on social media where people have ended up with female guppies in their tank when the shop have sold them as male guppies, and this is the last thing you want due to the rapid breeding rate of guppies. If you can get close enough to check, the easiest way to differentiate male and female guppies is the gonopodium on male guppies. That is a modified fin that is long and narrow. Female guppies usually have a lot less colour than males, especially on their bodies, and their body will usually be a more round shape rather than the slender shape of a male. If the guppies in the pet store are fully grown, then the females will be visibly larger than the males, and they can actually get to around twice the size as well. When it comes to working out how many guppies your tank can actually hold, I personally like to use the 1 male guppy per 1 US gallon of water rule. Keep in mind that the substrate, hardscape, plants, heater and filter in your aquarium will all take up volume, so the actual amount of water in there can be a lot less than the actual listed volume of your tank. A quick and easy workaround is to work out what 80% of your tank's maximum capacity is to get a rough idea of the actual water volume. Using a 10 US gallon tank as an example, you take the 10 US gallons and work out what 80% is, giving you 8 US gallons, and then you take that 8 and use that as the maximum number of male guppies you'd keep in that tank, so 8 male guppies. Earlier in the video I did recommend you aim for a minimum tank size of 10 US gallons, and this is due to this being the smallest tank size where you can realistically keep 8 male guppies in it without issue. Again, as I mentioned earlier in the article, personally I do see a difference in the behaviour when I keep at least 8 male guppies in the tank, and aggression does seem to be lower, and I've also had comments on YouTube and TikTok from other guppy keepers who also report the same. So now that we have our guppies in the tank, we might see some tail fanning, chasing or other signs of aggression. This is totally normal and to be expected in a tank where new male guppies have just been added because they are currently trying to establish their hierarchy. This lets the fish form their own internal rank structure for the tank, and it usually takes less than a month. I often see people look down on all male guppy tank setups due to the potential of aggression, but I quickly want to go over something. The University of Toronto did some research into the behaviour of male guppies both with and without female guppies in the tank. They found that male guppies that were unfamiliar with each other and hadn't had a chance to establish their hierarchy were significantly more aggressive with each other when female guppies were added to the tank. But on the flip side of that, male guppies that were familiar with each other and had their hierarchy in place were not as aggressive. This next bit of research from the University of North Carolina can also be important for all male guppies. Now, their tests were on mixed tanks with male and females in it, but they found that if they introduced a new male guppy to the tank, aggression levels would temporarily spike. One thing to take from this is to try and add all of your male guppies at the same time, so during the initial hierarchy setup the aggression is spread out between all of the fish. Another common thing that I see people worry about with guppies is food aggression, so that brings me on to my next point, feeding your all male guppy tank. Now, I was quite worried about this myself because there's a few posts on forums and social media saying that this will be a major issue with an all-male guppy tank, but in all honesty I can't remember ever seeing any type of food aggression in my all-male guppy tank. Here's some video evidence taken today from my tank, and as you can see, once food is added to the tank the guppies ignore each other and it's time to eat. Now, this could be because I ensure I am adding plenty of food for all of the guppies to the tank, but don't worry about overfeeding a little bit because adding shrimp will deal with this, and my shrimp do sometimes take food from my guppies. I use Fluval Bug Bites and NT Labs Microcrumb for the daily feed for my guppies, and I love both of them. I give my guppies at least one treat meal per week just to mix their diet up, and the treat meal will replace one of the regular meals. So for example, instead of getting NT Labs Microcrumb, they'll get frozen Daphnia or frozen Cyclops. I also add frozen bloodworm to the tank from time to time too, but that is usually just leftovers from treats for my other fish. The last thing that I want to touch on for setting up an all-male guppy tank is tank mates, and this is going to depend on your personal vision for your all-male guppy tank. For my personal vision, I just wanted to add as many male guppies as possible and keep things as safe, stable and harmonious as I could. That said, I do add Ammonia shrimp, yellow neocaridina shrimp and horned Nitrite snails, and these act as a cleanup crew in the tank, and I never see my guppies try to eat them or anything like that. Your vision for your guppy tank may be different and include other species of fish, with endless live bearers, endless guppies and platies all working well as tank mates for this type of setup. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Hopefully you've found it helpful and it can help you with your all-male guppy tank. Thanks for watching and have a good day.